עיתונאית בריטית מתעמתת עם תומכת חמאס אנטישמית. היא לא עונה על אף שאלה ומחייכת. אתם חייבים לראות עד הסוף. זה סרטון שאני מביא, יצא לפני 8 חודשים, אבל הסרטון הזה עדיין מאוד מאוד חשוב. להפיץ, להראות לכולם.
She's a pro-Palestinian activist. She's also a national campaigns coordinator of the Revolutionary Communist Party. Good afternoon to you.
אני רוצה להבהיר, פרו-פלסטיני זה נורא נורא עדין. היא תומכת חמאס, תומכת טרור, נגד היהודים ונגד מדינת ישראל.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, this death toll is obviously horrific. We know that women and children are included in this, although the Lebanese authorities haven't released how many Hezbollah militants were involved in those deaths. And obviously we're told by the Israelis these airstrikes are aimed on military targets. They have warned the innocent people of Lebanon to remove themselves, they're not in the way of these Israeli rockets. Israel's got a perfectly good right to defend themselves. They've been bombarded with rockets from Hezbollah since October the 8th, the day after the Hamas massacre in southern Israel. They've got every right to hit back, haven't they?
חבר'ה, אני חייב לעצור שנייה ולהגיד משהו קצר. תסתכלו על הפרצוף של זאתי מצד ימין. אני לא אומר שהיא על סמים, אבל כאילו מישהי על סמים שלא אכפת לה משום דבר. עיניים כאלה חדות של שנאה.
No, of course not. What has happened over the last week are acts of terrorism by Israel. This is mass terror where hundreds of innocent men, women and children have died. I mean, 50 children, I read that today, have died as a result of these attacks and these airstrikes. And it is absolutely outrageous. And to try and justify it in any way, as you have done and many in the West have done, Western media outlets have done, is completely hypocritical and outrageous.
Why is it hypocritical and outrageous? I mean, Israel wouldn't be firing rockets into southern Lebanon if Hezbollah, a major militant and prescribed terrorist organization which has control of a lot of southern Lebanon, had not already started firing rockets into Israel.
אני חייב שנייה לעצור. זאת מדברת על ווסטרן מדיה, התקשורת המערבית, שהיא לא טובה. היא גרה בבריטניה והיא פעילה פוליטית. הכל מובן. מוסלמית שבאה לכבוש את אירופה.
It's hypocritical and outrageous because everyone knows that if this sort of attack had happened, first of all, with the pages and then the walkie-talkies, and this innocent people had died, if this attack had happened in any other country and had been performed by someone other than Israel, we know exactly how Western media in chorus would come out to condemn and talk about how Lebanon to defend itself against these outrageous attacks.
Well, it would depend who those, I mean, going back to the pager attacks and the walkie-talkies, these exploding pages and walkie-talkies bought by Hezbollah, a prescribed terrorist organization, for their militant men to be used as a way of contacting each other, to basically to keep in touch. That was, I can't think of anything that is a more targeted attack than this. We understand, we believe Israel hasn't claimed responsibility, but that we believe their spy agency Mossad was behind this. I mean, it seems to me targeting the militant fighters of a terrorist organization is a perfectly legitimate act in warfare.
They blew them up in public in supermarkets.
Oh, how awful! They did it in public. How terrible! Why is that wrong?
Civilians and.
Civilians die in war. I'm going to have to break this to all the people who are so upset about what's happening in the Middle East. Civilians die in war. The only reason lots of Israelis don't die, other than on October the 7th, is because they have the defences to prevent those rockets from killing Israelis and 60,000 removed from their homes in northern Israel. The best way of stopping civilians dying in whether it's Gaza or indeed in Lebanon is if Hamas or Hezbollah stop firing rockets at Israel.
You say, oh, people die in war, isn't that very sad? Isn't
they
that?
Do.
שימו לב, היא לא עונה על שאלות, היא מקרקרת דף מסרים, זה הכל.
Of terrorists? Why do you refer
it's the statement of fact.
Why do you refer to dead innocent children as collateral damage?
No, that is literally... Okay, collateral damage is the military term used for civilian deaths.
Yeah. Or it's the price that Western imperialism is willing to pay in order to maintain its main ally in the region, which is Israel. Let's be clear. Israel is allowed to get away with murder. Israel is allowed to get away with terrorism.
I would say that Israel is held to a far higher account than any other country, by the way, largely autocratic, horrific regimes in the Middle East, which apparently don't bother a lot of people like you who've never seemed to criticise those regimes. It's held to a much higher account than the British military, the American military or any other ally.
האנשים האלה באים מהמזרח, מארצות ערב, מאסלאם, הם באים לאירופה, ואז הם מלכלכים על המדינות שהם חיים.
We're talking about this because the British government and British imperialism supports Israel because the British government and British imperialism, alongside the US, helps fund Israel and supply them with weapons.
Yes, we help supply and support a friendly nation state.
The majority of people in Britain do not support the supply of weapons and funding to Israel in the manner that this government does. It's totally undemocratic, and people want to organise against that, which I 100% support. And involved in that process is calling out the double standards and the hypocrisy of the media and presenters.
I would say the double standards and the hypocrisy is actually on behalf of people like you who hold Israel to a far higher account than any other Arab nation in the Middle East. But also, then you hold them to we should hold them to a higher account than the terrorist organisations. I mean, do you think that Hezbollah was justified in starting to fire rockets into Israel on October the 8th? Was that justified?
It's not about justifications. It's about understanding.
שימו לב איך היא לא עונה על שאלות, היא מדברת כמו רובוט, אוטמת את האוזניים, היא מקשיבה, אבל היא לא רוצה לענות, כי זאת האסטרטגיה שלה ושל התומכי חמאס אחרים.
What's happening and why?
I understand what's happening. It's a simple question. Were they or were they not justified to start firing into Israel to hit civilians in northern Israel?
The reason this is happening is because Netanyahu wants to force a war throughout that entire region. And why is
No. I'm asking you about what happened on October the 8th, because the only reason, if you seriously think that it's in the Israeli people or the Israeli government's interest for there to be a war on two fronts at the moment, I think Frank, you're not quite understanding how war works. They did not start the war with Hezbollah on October the 8th. Hezbollah did that. That was their choice, prescribed terrorist organisation that, like Hamas, backed by Iran, funded by Iran, and believes that Israel has no right to exist, and indeed that Jews have no right to exist. Oh yeah, and anyone else, including infidels like myself, have a right to exist. Do you think that Hezbollah was justified when they fired rockets into Israel at civilians on October the 8th? Yes or no?
In whose interest is this war, this drive to war? Netanyahu, that's it at the end of the day.
I'm no fan of Netanyahu, but that's not the point. He didn't fire the first
היא לא מקשיבה, כמו שאמרתי לכם, תשימו לב חברים.
rocket, did he?
Why do you want to see an end to rockets and all of this kind of stuff? Presumably because you want to see an end to death and destruction and everything that's taking place. But why is it happening? Why is it happening?
Why is it happening? You tell me.
For decades, Western imperialism has meddled across that entire region because it wants to maintain access to markets and resources. It is absolutely clear.
You think we've got a say over what happens in Saudi Arabia and places like that? Are you kidding me? Have you seen oil prices?
Up to the US government if you want to talk about Saudi Arabia. We're here talking about the terrorist attacks that Israel has conducted in Lebanon, which has killed hundreds of people.
No, those weren't terrorists.
מקרקרת דף מסרים, אותו דבר, בכיינות, ועוד פעם בכיינות, אבל לא עונים על שאלות. שואלים אותו שאלות, אז אתם רואים, אי אפשר לפתור את זה, חברים. שטיפות מוח עמוקות. הילדה הזאת שטופת מוח, חבל על הזמן.
Because terrorist attacks are aimed at civilians. These were targeted at terrorists themselves. Hold on a second. What did you make about attacks on Al-Qaeda fighters, militants? What about attacks on ISIS militants? Were they terror attacks when the West killed those people?
Listen. You're not interested in actually talking about terrorism, what it is, or where it comes from.
No, I don't think you know what terrorism is. A democratic nation state defending themselves, targeting terrorist militants who are firing rockets at their civilians. Responding to that with a targeted attack is not terrorism. Under any use, I mean, unless you're just going to make up every single definition of a word, that's not terrorism.
Israel is not a democratic state.
Israel's not a democratic state. So all those Israelis, including Arab Israelis, by the way, who go to vote in the polls, are they imagining that?
You know, even within Israel, I don't know if you've seen, there have been mass protests against Netanyahu and against what
wait a minute. People in a democratic country protesting, and weirdly, unlike any other country in the Middle East,
אם יעשו הפגנות בארצות מוסלמיות, ישחטו אותם תוך שנייה.
not being shot by their own soldiers or arrested. How incredible. So it's a democratic state. So do people go and vote?
They were arrested, and actually I'd say the Israeli state is responsible for that.
People who committed crimes were arrested. Do people go and vote in Israel? Do they vote?
Do you
yes
want
or
to
no? No, you just told me that they're not a democratic. You think that Israel are terrorists. They're not a democratic state. I'm waiting. You haven't used the word apartheid yet. I'm waiting for that one.
Well, thanks for bringing it up.
Oh, here we go.
The point is, you mentioned Israel's right to defend itself and all of this kind of stuff. If Israel's right to defend itself is based on the slaughter of tens of thousands of people all around it, continuous terrorist
attacks. The Hamas fighters around it and the Hezbollah fighters,
of course it doesn't have the right to do that.
Yes, it does. They absolutely have the right to slaughter the militants for terrorist groups who wish to...
You were just a mouthpiece for Western imperialism. You were just a mouthpiece for Israeli state-sponsored terrorism that is killing hundreds of people.
Not terrorism. I'm not a mouthpiece for anyone. I just know right from wrong. And I'm pretty sure that most right-thinking people are on the side of a democratic government, which isn't an apartheid state, and not on the side of terrorists. You appear to be on the side of the terrorists.
Which has conducted an attack on a party, whether you like them or not, in a different country to attack them. That is not a democratic action. That is not a democratic.
They're not. They're not a party. They're a prescribed militant terrorist organisation.
Sorry?
They're a prescribed militant terrorist organisation.
Okay.
What do you think that Britain should do? Let's imagine a scenario where Britain was, for instance, let's say French militants arrived in Britain and killed, raped, mutilated, tortured, and killed 1,200 of our people and took 150 of them hostage to France. Meanwhile, Germany decided, let's just say the nearby country, Germany decided to bomb, Norfolk or something, okay?
המראיינת מנסה להסביר דברים מאוד מאוד בסיסיים ופשוטים למישהי שהיא שבורה במוח. היא שונאת ישראל, זה הכל.
What would be an appropriate response by our imperialist state to those crimes? What would we be allowed to do in Fiona Lali's world?
Okay, that was absurd. Rather than talking about bizarre hypotheticals, let's talk about what's actually happening, which is Israel wants to drive a war throughout that region. And the British government, let's talk about Britain, because that's where we live. The British government is going to support that. The British government is going to go along with whatever the US government wants.
שיעיפו אותה מבריטניה, איזה טמבלים.
And whatever Western imperialism in the whole wants. And I want to organize people against that, against
I know you want to do that, but
and
what would be an appropriate reaction if the same thing happened to us? This is my question. What would be an appropriate reaction for us if that happened to us?
It's not happening to us. Let's not talk.
You understand?
אי אפשר לשאול אותה שאלה אחת. אם היא עצבנה אתכם, תרשמו למטה. אני חייב לדעת. כי אותי עצבנה חבל הזמן.
Understand the concept of a hypothetical. When you say that what Israel is doing is not justified, I'm asking what would be justified? So if it happened to us, what would we be justified in doing?
There's no justification.
Is that concept too complicated for you?
No justification.
There's no justification.
What it did historically.
There's no, okay, leave out that's what I'm saying. Take it away from Israel. If Belgium was invaded by what would be allowed by you? What would be a reasonable response that you wouldn't call terrorism?
You say to take it away from Israel, but this is the problem with Israel.
Now this is the issue, isn't it? Because it's Israel. Israel is the problem, isn't it?
You don't want to talk about the truth of what is happening. Yeah, the Israeli state and what it is doing is the source of
why Israel of all the nations? Because virtually all of the nation states in virtually all of the countries in the Middle East had their lines drawn in the sand by a British peer. Why is Israel the country that bothers you so much when you've got wars being fought by Saudi Arabia in Yemen? Tens of thousands of innocent civilians dying there. Assad bombing and killing, torturing, maiming his own people in Syria. What we've seen in Iraq, what we see in Iran right now, women being subjugated, tortured, just for not covering their hair. Why is it that uniquely It is Israel that seems to irk you so much.
כל הכבוד למראיינת שהיא מחזיקה מעמד.
Because uniquely, Israel is funded by Western imperialism, both historically and today. And I live in Britain, which historically played a massive role in the propping up of Israel and continues to do so today alongside the US.
That's the reason. That's the reason.
Answer your question is,
do you know, I'm going to be honest with you, Fiona. Time's against me. I could do this for the next 2 hours, but I've got to go to a break. I don't believe you, and I don't think anyone watching or listening to this believes you.
Okay.
נכנסה בחזק. חבר'ה, תשתפו, תנו לייק, נתראה בסרטונים הבאים.